There we
Okay. Fine. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Lovely.
go. Okay.
I'll just let Giles just sorting out his slides. He's also looking like he's not got it quite set up correctly. We're having a few technical issues this morning. Oh my goodness, Microsoft quitted unexpectedly. João, you're
No, I hit my picture as you taught us, but then I can't unmute myself anymore. So that like was my drama for the past kind of like minutes. But now I got it. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I never turn off my self view when I'm presenting. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So hello everyone. So again, yeah, so I'll give a brief introduction about the workshop and tell you that well, just to kick off our thinking around informal communities, really. So as I said, it's really a pleasure to be here, and I think informal communities is a topic which I found really particularly interesting from a number of points of view. So I'll perhaps start talking about this now. So I think most of you know me. Directing the Institute for Global Sustainable Development, and very glad to use these workshops here as a means of connecting, of fostering more connections around Warwick, and of us thinking about research collaborations, really. So why informal communities? So as probably many of you who are interested in the topic know, it's a topic which it's very kind of like current. There are expected more of 1 billion people to live today in informal settlements, or also called slums. So in this brings us to the kind of like start of the complexity of the topic, because this is an expected number, although it's the statistics are not really very reliable. We also, this term informal communities, or it's usually used interchangeably with informal settlements, informal communities, and slums. So some of you here who have collaborated with us have seen use of these different terms in different places. UN Habitat, in particular, the Human Settlements Program of UN, has a definition of slum specifically, which is based on the so-called 5 deprivations. So, which is places in that lack, as in the slide, improved access to water, sanitation, sufficient living area, durable housing, and secure tenure, and combinations of this. Although exactly which combinations define a slum and which not is something that varies quite a lot. As and actually in SDG 11, the Sustainable Development Goal 11, also there is the added dimension of affordability, which is not in the 5 kind of like deprivations, but also considered one of the items of desirability of housing. So here you have a picture of perhaps one or a settlement or a community or informal community we would see as perhaps prototypical of a slum, so self-built, self-constructed, emerging informally in the fringes of a city. This is the city of Medellin, where we are have some ongoing projects in Colombia. So currently there are no systematic way or no kind of like standardized way of defining and identifying slums or informal settlements and informal communities. And I think this poses both challenges and opportunities, and I think makes the topic complex. So but also interesting. So the second perhaps currency is also related to the current pandemic, COVID-19, and as probably you are aware, informal settlements have been very severely impacted by the pandemic. So in the most recent UN SDG report released last month, also showing that actually we had the reverse in the trend of reducing the share of people living in slums or in informal settlements. And that's quite worrying. So in a way, we are far from being on track of the goal of ending the slums by 2030, which is the SDG 11.1 goal. So actually, especially in Northern Africa, Western Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, actually there was increases in people living in slums reported, and in Latin America and that there has been actually much less progress than before. So the impact also in general in communities of this pandemic have been very severe. I think, as many of you who are also working in that have seen that in also looking at researching this, both in terms of health, but I think, in my experiences, even more severe sometimes have been the impacts to livelihoods, income. And this kind of like exposed a little bit the intersecting inequalities, so that these communities that characterize is in terms of composing difficulties of poverty, but also informal work. A lot of people who live in slums are active in informal communities without job security, difficulty in access to transport, and being further away from jobs, and as well that made them much more exposed to some of the contamination or some of the kind of like venues for contracting the virus, and also lack of access to healthcare. So I think in this combination we've seen definitely that communities have been these informal communities have been the center stage in preoccupations, at least, but actually many of governments in the global south have been kind of like overwhelmed with the response, and sometimes the communities have been not properly included in the responses. But I think the other side is that actually the crisis has shown a lot of resilience and capacity to self-organize and to do community-led mobilization for response. So this has been perhaps less emphasized. So a lot in the media was about how threatened at first, and then secondly affected maybe Latin America more than Africa at the moment, but still like definitely the focus is on the impacts. But actually there was a lot of organization and communities self-initiative, which I think was quite remarkable. In some of the projects we are involved, for example, people self-organized the collection of food donations and delivery to the most in need, self-monitoring of the community, establishment of support networks, doing cleaning and hygiene measures in the territories, and even in some cases contracting and hiring private healthcare, really. So in a way, a lot of sources of resilience and showing the kind of like potential of these communities to have their own self-organization and come up with a plan. And I think this has emphasized a little bit this need to think of informal communities and these areas of cities in the global south for the next years, for the economic recovery, which will be unavoidable from this crisis, for the current pandemic crisis. And I think UN Habitat in particular, we put some materials in the preparation material on that, has been emphasizing this in their recovery plan, that that communities, informal settlements have to be really center stage in any strategy of recovery now, and emphasizing the need for community-driven recovery and development, which I think is quite important, really. But for that, I think there are a number of challenges here in terms of how to make that a reality. So I think this context is, it sets an initial context for our workshop here. Is now looking at this, the currency of talking about informal communities, of looking at how we as researchers relate to informal communities in research now and in the future. What are the main challenges and what are the opportunities for really us kind of like plugging research efforts, transdisciplinary research efforts that cut across, health, social sciences, humanities, and sciences, which we have here in the virtual room today. People from different parts of the universities, and how actually we think together of doing research that can contribute to this scenario, and then support those efforts here. So that's kind of like the initial motivation. There is another set of motivations which are related to, perhaps our own research and bases are in this area, which I will talk a little bit more in afterwards. But I think, that gives us a kind of like a glance at the motivations for us to make this an important topic for IGSD and for the community in Warwick, and bring this to attention, and then perhaps discuss together. I'm keen to learn also from you, what would be the next research items and ideas that we could get from this group. And with this, I'll stop here and get back to you, Christine.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. So that